Oh my goodness. How is everyone doing? Thanks for joining Brandon to cruise myself, Jeff Black, for another episode of Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, today is episode 30. Lifestyle factors that limit your fat loss and body composition progress. I have a feeling this will be a really good one compared to what, especially the train we've been running lately. We've had a lot of really good feedback. So we really appreciate you guys sharing and engaging with us and making it, really enjoyable for Brandon and I to meet weekly. So we just wanted to say thank you for that. But with that being said, let's get into how the last 7 days. I did not know that Brandon was a big Halloween fan until prior to going on air. So apparently he was out there partying and pimping and all the other things in between. But man, how's it been for the last week for you?
Man, like I was telling you off air, it's been a great 7 days, man. As you and the audience know, it's been a little bit over a month since I wrapped up my active dieting portion of my fat loss phase or my photo shoot prep. And so I've really been focusing on nailing my post-diet recovery phase. That's been like, lock-in center. And the one goal I actually really had when ending my dieting phase was to improve upon my sleep quality. That's something I've always suffered with. I had a sleep disorder as a kid. My father suffered from sleep apnea. So it's kind of in the heredity, and then also with my personality. As you know, you and I are the only ones up at 4 a.m., 4 or 3 a.m. for the most part. And so that's why we get along so well, because many of our initial conversations when we first started linking up were in those early morning hours, because we were the only ones awake, and with the type of mindsets that always our minds are always running. So I've literally everything possible to maximize my sleep quality, my sleep quantity. And I have to say that I've paid so much attention to detail to it and made some investments into it that it's made a dramatic, benefit to myself already. You know what I mean? It's been a few weeks and I've really been sleeping better. And I recently bought new bedding. I bought even darker version of blackout
What
blinds.
bedding did you go with?
Well, I got just super comfortable bedding first and foremost. Then I got a weighted blanket to get on top of me. It's 30 pounds. So it helps with to make you feel like essentially how they described it was the weight is going to help with you staying in bed essentially. And then I have actually I'll show you. I got a new pair of blue light blocking glasses, but look at them.
Dude, you look
Nothing
like
darker
you're
than that.
like you look like
Doesn't
Blade
allow
Runner.
look to the side. It doesn't allow any light, any
Wow.
external light in. So it's been incredible. So but besides that, it's not just all about gadgets, because I have, the Aura rings, and we're into technology. But really, the most substantial changes I've made have been to my lifestyle, my habits, which are stuff that we're going to focus on today. And it's really been on how I approach those final 60 to 90 minutes, because I'm the type of individual that has always worked until the time I went to bed. Like I've fallen asleep many a nights. My girlfriend has found me, I'm asleep next to my laptop, on my dining room table. And so I've really tried to wind down, look into some meditation type practices within the last 60 to 90 minutes prior to going to bed.
I've been doing that.
Just really trying to get my mind, in a state. I'm doing a brain dump at night. So a lot of the things that I promote to my clientele were things that I honestly was overlooking. And honestly, I haven't slept this well since high school. And it's been great, man. It's been great to finally feel what it's like to operate both mentally and physically under non-sleep restricted conditions and without like a ton of accumulated sleep debt. Especially because from an information perspective, like I want to be able to retain, I want to be able to understand, retain, and apply as much information as I'm learning in these courses. I've invested a ton of money into them first and foremost, and a lot of time. And so I want to get the most out of it from these continuing education courses as possible. But other than that, as Jeff mentioned, Halloween is one of my favorite festivities. I was someone, my mother was huge into Halloween and scary movies, and that was a tradition we always had. And she's still to this day, we are the only her place, in the development that I grew up in, she is the only house that gives out candy still, because it's all older, adults at this point, but kids still come, visit their grandparents and stuff. She's the only person. She gets so excited every year. So it was something that was kind of a part of my childhood. So luckily Christina's family, my girlfriend's family, is real big into Halloween. So they threw an all-day Halloween party on Sunday. And then we went to a new event that I had never heard of. It's called I think it's called Hauntoween, and it's at the PNC Bank Arts Center. And essentially that's like the big concert hall in New Jersey where anyone and everyone plays at. Like that's where I went to my first concert. And so
who was your first concert?
Drake.
You did that
Drake.
one? I did a band known as 7 Mary 3.
Wow. I've never heard of them.
Yeah, no, not many people have. Very obscure. So, all right.
Yeah, Drake was my first concert. So that was my first year of college, my freshman year of college. I went to go see Drake, and that was a memorable one. But yeah, so it was a huge event. We were luckily able to bring the dog. However, she was a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of people and the amount of lights and action and stuff. But it was an incredible event. So all in all, it's been a solid week in my world. First and foremost, it's the start of the month. I'm excited for November. There's tons of events. It is, I don't want to say on the air what year it is, but it is a big birthday for my girlfriend, one that we are very much looking forward to. We are throwing her a massive party. So that's exciting. We have so many events coming up in terms of family holidays, in terms of anniversaries, things like that. So it's a really exciting month ahead. So I'm looking forward to it. And other than that, I've actually this week, yesterday morning, I started working on my PhD presentation. So as you guys have known, and you hear on the podcast, we've been talking about the seventh Physique Education Collective. And so I am presenting on the topics of optimizing insulin sensitivity and managing blood glucose or blood glucose management. And it's something
Mhm.
I'm really passionate about, but I've really gotten deeper and deeper into the science. There were some new meta-analyses from 2021 and 2022 that I had yet to look into, really around the areas of GLUT4 translocation and both insulin-mediated and
Mhm.
non-insulin-mediated glucose uptake. And those are things I'm going to be incorporating into my presentation because, yes, I'll cover the ins and outs of, everyone wants to know about the GDAs, and I have a big background in that because I did actually formulate 3 GDAs that are currently on the market with, in my previous career. But a lot of people want to know about these sexy things that they can add in, the metformins and the GLP-1 agonists. And like, really, we got to look at lifestyle first and foremost. And that is going to be the theme of today's podcast. But I'm really looking forward to diving even deeper into this topic. I always say that insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance is something that I have an integral tie to it because my father did die of diabetes related complications. And I always say, when I learn about some of these concepts, I wish to God that the information was available and was easily accessible when he was still around, because I think things could have been different. And so when I've worked with a lot of type 2 diabetics over the years. I just actually had someone with severe insulin resistance come to me. And it's always good to be able to use different interventions and help them improve their lifestyle and do things that I wish I could have done with my own father. So it's something that I'm passionate about, and I think you guys are going to hear that when I do present, and I'm looking forward to it. But other than that, man, my week's going good. I'm excited to be back on the air with you. Number 30, man. Hey,
Dude,
we've
no
we've cranked
shit.
these things. We've cranked these things out. Haven't missed a week to this date, and we got 30 others in us, and probably another 300. So I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to keeping the ride going. But tell me about your week.
Well, let's see. First off, I was gonna say like the bedding. I bought a Nectar, Nectar Nectar mattress a couple of years ago, and that changed my life as far as my sleep. And then I also got these sheets. They're like jersey material. They're called Sheetix or something like Sheetx. And you just sleep so like you breathe like when you're sleeping, it keeps you cool. And that actually enhanced my sleep score on my Oura ring. It brought it from like a 60 up to like a 70 to 85, just depending upon how I
On
sleep.
what device?
Aura.
On Aura.
Mhm.
So I'm just going to give you insight to my sleep quality. I'm averaging 89% right now.
Good for you.
Yeah,
Good for
but but
you.
but keep in mind, I want to be completely objective. That is within the last 4 weeks. I suffer really badly when I'm dieting. I'm just someone. I
Yeah,
have
me
high
too.
adrenaline levels. I've always, even on lab tests, whether it's serum or it's salivary cortisol testing, I've always had high cortisol levels. So I'm pretty much that type of person that has that dawn response, especially in the morning, where I'll wake up and my blood glucose is usually pretty low, but in times of dieting, they actually raise throughout the course of a dieting phase. And so it's that adrenaline dump, it's that cortisol liberation of energy and blood glucose into, it's causing the breakdown of hepatic glycogen to liberating glucose into the bloodstream. So it's raising that blood glucose levels. And so I've been someone that's always suffered with sleep issues. And so I've really been dialing it in. But as of my average last week was 87, this week was 89. So hey, it's trending up, my man.
Good for you, man. Let's see. My last 7 days ago, my dream car finally showed up.
Hell yeah.
I have hurt a couple of Corvettes feelings and quite a few Challengers and Chargers. I had to message my friend on Saturday. I'm like, dude, why are people speeding up to me and slowing back down? He's like, oh, that's the new way to race. And he's a cop. So I was like, so they come up beside you and you're supposed to slow down to 60. Then you guys get like a little bit of a run and then you gun it to 120.
Okay,
So
so I'm going to interrupt you right there because
sure.
I'm from Jersey, so we drive aggressively, and you were one to be very transparent with me. And when Jeff, so I was able to drive Jeff when we were driving, or when I was with Jeff in Tennessee last, I drove us around certain times, and he was just a pretty relaxed guy, nothing worrisome, but he was worried about my driving in this respect that I was apparently speeding everywhere I went, but
it was hilarious.
I was going to normal, the limits that I'm used to, and not realizing that in Tennessee, we're on these East Bumble roads and they'll pull you over.
East Bumble roads. Yeah, they will. They'll get you for drugs and shit.
So how are you racing anyone? That's what I want to know. Your average speed limit's like 26.
Yeah, average speed limit was 26. Dude, it's just that town I live in, Mount Juliet. The cops got nothing better than to pull you over for like speeding. They get you for like 5 miles an hour.
Because I have some big feet. For the audience to know, I have a size 14 foot. I did not fit in Jeff's Lexus. I barely fit.
Yeah, you were in my lap. You were in my lap in the back seat.
I literally couldn't even put my foot on the gas. I could just put the tip of my Jordans on the gas, because if I went any more than that, I was going to be in speeding territory.
Yeah, no doubt. There's an interstate here, 840. It's a big loop. Now the cops run on it. And then once you get into the city, you kind of get past the Mount Juliet line, you could go again. So I was having these cars do it. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I might as well try it. But other than that, man, I had a very good weekend. I just unplugged, just really kind of just spent some good quality time, just chilled and unplugged. And I needed to do that. I got some big things coming for Relentless that I'm working on, like as far as overhauling the website, and things like that. So just a lot of work in progress. Nothing really exciting except for, I shaved down to a beautiful mustache. Brandon had a hard time when I first logged on. I have been told it's oddly satisfying when people see me with it. I'm like, oh, but so the reason I did that is November is Men's Health Awareness Month. So, No Shave November. There's also having a mustache, and it's to bring awareness to men's health issues. And primarily a lot of it now is men's mental health is what it's similar, kind of like circling around. So what we're doing at my gym is anyone who signs up, we're donating all their fees plus all the, I think it's like 20% of proceeds from all the sales in the store. And then there's another funnel that Thera has. So all that money at the end of the month, I'm going to match it personally, and we're going to donate it to the local police department. They have a suicide prevention program that they do with a lot of first responders here in our city. And my gym has always been supported by first responders. So I wanted to be able to give back to community. So that's why I am sporting a mustache, to help bring awareness to men's health and the current crisis that men are having with our high suicide numbers.
I love that.
Yeah.
So when I hopped on, I saw a new Jeff and one with a very thick mustache, and I was surprised, but you did not give me that insight, but that's an extremely worthy cause. I honestly agree. Men's mental health is something that is highly under discussed. It's something that's overlooked and neglected, and something that many are suffering from. So I think that's incredible. I personally work with a lot of first responders. I work with a lot of military veterans, and I've seen the prevalence of that, whether it's PTSD, depression, things related to that sort. And I've also seen the amount of clients that I've had come to me within the last year. I was actually just on a client consult before we got online, and it was the prevalence of SSRI usage has risen dramatically. And so, with body composition focused individuals, a lot of times, they have multiple goals. Obviously, they have both physical goals, they have mental goals, they have, body composition related goals. But I've had actually in the last month or two, a good amount of individuals that have come to me and said, listen, I'm having these issues, and not only basically they're having body composition related issues, weight gain, issues with appetite management, binge eating, things of that sort. But it's also, they're tying it back to the fact that they were just put on an SSRI, and the changes that they're feeling and their fluctuations in their emotions, their hormones. But I've really made it apparent to them, first and foremost, some of them have asked me, do you think I should taper off? Absolutely not. I am not a medical practitioner, and I will not play the role of one. That is something that you need to, honestly, that is something that you need to, I know a lot of coaches, unfortunately, they step outside their scope of practice, and it's only about the body composition related goals. But here's the thing, that means nothing if you don't have your mental health. So, when I say a healthy body is a responsive body, I mean mind, body, and spirit. And so I think it's great that people are opening up a little bit more. And I'm also, I'm extremely proud that you're doing that. So kudos to you, my friend.
Thank you, man. Actually, I'm almost done editing my book, and I wrote a whole chapter about how conventional medicine, in terms of SSRIs, and those did not work for me. And I went down the psychedelic rabbit hole in 2017, and that's what gave me relief. So I have coffees with men quite a bit. I have lunches with men. There's a good group of men We all get together every month or two here in Nashville. I'm actually having my first ever bourbon trail and UFC fight night party at my house next weekend. So there's going to be about 20 guys at my house. We're going to have about like 20 bottles of different bourbons and watch the UFC fight and just have some camaraderie. So I tell men that the more they open up and the more they talk about this stuff, the better off all of us are going to be for it. And the better our suicide numbers will drop as well. I firmly believe
I really think, if we actually look at statistically, women suffer from mental, they're diagnosed with more mental disorders than we are. Correct. In terms of depression, in terms of suicide, things of that sort. However, I think it's really just due to the fact that it's not discussed, and it's almost looked at as it's not something that should be discussed. Like, guys shouldn't open up. They shouldn't have emotions. They shouldn't go to one another. And I really think that that's something that we have to dispel from our culture, especially in our fitness culture, because everyone has like this bravado that they have to have. Everyone's, unfortunately, Mom, forgive me for this, but everyone in the fitness industry is in a dick measuring contest. They're all, jacked up on testosterone.
Forgive him, man.
Whether it's exogenous or not. And they feel that they have to present like this macho man, this machismo. Yeah. And I understand that because I was raised in a very similar environment. However, the relationships that I have with guys that I value the most are those like yourself that I've opened up with and told, we've talked about past traumas that we've had, childhood and otherwise, our childhood upbringings, things that we've suffered through, and that's bonded us. And that is something that more people should do and should be encouraged to do. So anyone out there, like, guys, we're a fitness podcast, don't get me wrong. And we're really focused on, generally we speak on body composition and stuff, but don't be ashamed to be who you are. Talk about these hard things. Like, when I first came onto this podcast, I had already done 100+ podcasts. And here's the thing, I never had opened up about my issues with eating disorders and the things that I dealt with from my childhood experiences. And what really caused me to go into this route of really looking into nutrition and training and using that as an outlet to help me rehabilitate both my mind and my body. And I've gotten so many people that have reached out that have listened to that first episode and have thanked me for that, because they saw someone that was successful in the fitness industry. This is their words. I'm not saying I'm successful. I'm just saying what they said. And it was really enlightening to them that I was able to open up about some of my past, experiences, my failures, my successes, and things that I've dealt with that I could, they can relate to as well, but they've just never discussed it. They didn't realize that other people had experienced it as well. So this is definitely an issue in our society, and something I hope that we could all work through and help each other through.
Yeah, man, I appreciate. We actually have the statistics getting written up on the gym mirrors about how many men take their life and stuff like that. So I'll send you some of that stuff.
Absolutely.
We really get after our efforts. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, if you guys see me with the beautiful stash, now you guys know why. But it might be here to stay because it's getting a lot of compliments. So we'll go from there. All right. So today we're going to talk about, we identified 4 areas. So these are like the 4 mistakes that people make for top lifestyle mistakes that might be holding back or are holding back your fat loss progress. So we have 4 of them we want to go over. Mistake number 1, overestimating the amount of calories you burn per day. You see that a lot. Brandon and I do. You'll see the Orange Theory, the runners, the triathlons. They're like, my iWatch, like the other day, my iWatch said I burned like 1,800 calories. I'm like, damn, well, just the other day I said I burned 1,000. I did literally the identical things, so I guess I'm running hot today, or whatever it was. So you have a lot of that, but I talk to a lot of people in my gym and they will look at the cardio machines, for example, and they'll input their weight, all these different things. Like, yeah, I got on that elliptical. I burned 982 calories in 45 minutes. I'm like, well, have you dropped any weight? And they're like, well, no. And now I look at their diet. I'm like, well, there's no way you burn that many calories. Like, you know what I mean? Like when you line it up. So that's the one thing we really want to kind of get into first. Brandon, let's dive into the overestimating the calories you burn per day. I know you see that problem a bunch. I know that we've talked about it a few times, from the trackers to the faulty apps to the food labels that are even up to 20% wrong. So let's get into that.
Absolutely, my man. So yeah, like you mentioned, one of the most common mistakes dieters make during a fat loss phase is believing they burned far more calories in a day than they actually did, especially when it comes to exercise. And as we covered last week, our ability to accurately track and estimate our calorie intake is considerably off, and we tend to overestimate, or underestimate rather, the amount of calories we eat per day by an average of 20 to 50%. But the issue is that we don't just underestimate how many calories we consume, but we also misestimate and tend to overestimate the amount of calories we burn. So in a study by Lickman and colleagues, they looked at people who had claimed that they were metabolically resistant. And this is something that's becoming more and more prominent. This term within our society and within the fitness space is the term metabolic resistance. And so these were individuals that claimed that they were metabolically resistant, and they claimed that because they said that they had the inability to lose weight. They had, you know, done dieting phases. They had went into deficits, but they were unable to lose the weight that they had aimed for. Now, when the researchers actually took them into a metabolic ward, so everything was controlled, and tested their energy intake and energy expenditure, they found that they underreported their calorie intake by an average of 47%, which came out to over 1,000 calories on average per day. But they also were over-reporting their physical activity expenditure by 51%, which totaled to another 251 calories. So in total, when they looked at their total misreporting of their calorie intake and their calorie expenditure, they were off by 1,300 calories, or a little bit over 1,300 calories, actually. And this was the reason as to why they weren't seeing the weight loss that they desired. And it wasn't because they were metabolically resistant or had a damaged or broken metabolism, as so many of them thought. And the likelihood and the error of margin when it comes to overestimating our energy expenditure is even higher when it comes to exercise as compared to when we're just talking about our physical activity levels. Because in that study, they were doing no exercise. They were in a metabolic ward, so they were just in a lab setting. They weren't doing any, intentional exercise throughout the course of the day, and they still were off by 50+%. Now, there's studies that look at actual exercise interventions, and they look at how many calories do people think they really burn during a cardio session or a weight training session or whatever it may be. And so to test this margin of error, the University of Ottawa conducted a randomized control trial to see how much men and women overestimate exercise energy expenditure. And in this study, they took both young and middle-aged, normal weight, moderately active men and women and blinded them to two randomly assigned cardio sessions. They had one group do a 200-calorie treadmill session, while the other did a 300-calorie treadmill session, but both were done at a low intensity. So I believe it was 50% of VO2 max, which is right around that list intensity. I mean, you're right in that aerobic metabolism, you're only burning fat. It's very in low intensity. And so at the end of each exercise session, individuals were asked to estimate the energy expenditure of the exercise sessions and to then eat the calorie equivalent of their estimated exercise energy expenditure from a buffet type meal. So they essentially just said, listen, they wanted to see how people would naturally eat in response to a cardio session in order to compensate or eat back for the calories that they burned. And this is something that's really common. Like if you look at the general population client or someone that's a lifestyle client, you'll often hear a lot of times people say that they're eating back the calories they burned after hard workout because they burned X amount of calories or because their Apple Watch said they burned 600 calories. Now, the shocking part of the study was that the individuals who only did 200 calories worth of cardio estimated that they had burned 825 calories. And those who did the 300-calorie session estimated that they had burned around 900 calories. So they overestimated their calorie burn by 3 to 4-fold in both conditions. Then,
Damn.
I know, it's crazy. So then when the researchers monitored how much they ate at the post-workout meal, they found that those in the 200-calorie group ended up eating an average of 556 calories, whereas those in the 300-calorie group ended up eating an average of 607 calories. So in both cases, they ate back more than double the calories they burned, which shows how off our estimations of calorie expenditure are. And this is a mistake that many dieters will make. And then they'll see that they're not losing weight or they're even gaining weight as a result of this, and they'll think that their metabolism is broken or they'll think that something's wrong because in their mind, they believe that they're burning far more calories through exercise and they're actually in a deficit when in actuality, they burn far less calories and they have overcompensated by eating much more. And Jeff kind of mentioned this, but we've also covered the fact that, activity trackers are highly inaccurate. And so when we look at it, not only do we overestimate this when we don't have a calorie tracker, but this is even further compounded by the fact that activity trackers and apps like MyFitnessPal are wildly inaccurate in their calorie burn estimations. And they don't have the capabilities to track the aspects of our total daily energy expenditure, like our NEAT, like our exercise activity thermogenesis, like our basal metabolic rate or our thermic effective feeding, that are lowered and downregulated through the metabolic adaptation sustained while we're losing weight in the deficit. So for example, a 2017 study out of Stanford found that some of the most popular brands of activity trackers, including the Apple Watch, the Fitbit, and the Samsung Gear, had errors in their estimation of energy expenditure, aka the calories burned, ranging from 27 to 93%. So basically, if one of those devices says that you're burning, say, 600 calories during a bout of exercise, you probably only burn between 300 to 450. So these errors can easily compound. They can add up not only from across the course of a day, but over the course of weeks, months. And that could easily erode the deficit that you think you create. And this is the worst thing. A lot of people, they suffer from restraint or restriction because they believe that they're doing everything that they're supposed to do. They believe that they're only eating 1,200 calories and they're tracking that accurately. They believe they're burning 600 calories during a hit training session or whatever it
Right.
may be. And so they're in a restraint mindset. So they're suffering from the psychological aspects of dieting, but they're getting none of the results. But it's because our physiology interprets our actual calorie intake and our actual calorie expenditure, not what we think. So this is a really big error that so many people make, that if they just looked at, not overestimating or realizing that, yes, exercise is a great intervention, but we can't just look at it for the calories burned. We also need to think about the health benefits, the blood glucose regulation, the muscle gaining benefits of resistance training, for instance. There's other advantages and there's other benefits to exercise that go far beyond the calories burned, because if we only concentrate on the calories burned, and you guys actually looked into the literature on how many calories are burned per minute of exercise, it's kind of depressing, to be honest with you. It's not like the most highly
It's
effective.
very sad.
It is. And that's why nutrition is the number, diet and nutrition are the number one interventions to losing fat. And it's not that it shouldn't be combined with exercise, but it's that we have to be cautious of being a little bit more realistic in our estimations of how much or how significant of an impact that this is going to have on our calorie intake and our calorie expenditure.
Agreed. I also would like to chime in. I think because of the way technology has just boomed and how easy it is for anything, that people just take tech for like, okay, tech said that, so that's that. Like, meaning I legitimately will have conversations with people and they really believe that like the iWatch or whatever they're using, that's 100% true. They're like, well, it's technology. Technology's come a long way. And I'm like, yeah, maybe, and I have stuff like that. So I try to tell people like, it's great to have an idea of that stuff. Like, definitely you can use your calorie tracker to kind of have an idea of like, am I active daily? Should be the question you're asking yourself. Am I getting my steps? Am I getting a sweat going? Things like that's good for. But I do not go, oh, I only burned 1,800 calories today. I better go out and get like another 10,000 steps to get another 200 or whatever that number arbitrarily might be. I think you have to base what Brandon was saying is look at a lot of the habits, like Brandon always talks about. What are your habits? And then double down on those more so than the tech. But tech is a good guide to some degrees.
I think technology is incredible. And I think
True.
we need to use tools for what they're best used for. What have they been designed for? And a lot of times, if you're utilizing a Fitbit, if you're using an Aura ring, if you're using an Apple Watch, use it for steps and realize even with steps, they're 5 to 10% off. They can be up or over. And so, and usually they overestimate because of the fact that right now I might get a step or two because I'm waving my hands while I'm talking. And so there are.
Yeah, but would that still be burning energy and moving because you're fidgeting and stuff like that? Wouldn't that still count? I mean,
yes, but if we actually look at, so Levine has a study done on the differences in walking compared to fidgeting compared to sitting,
okay.
and it is a difference. So this goes off of something called the METs. It's metabolic equivalence table.
Okay.
And so when we're seated, we're burning, I think it's, it raises your metabolic equivalent to, like 1.5. So, steady state is 1. That would be 1 times your basal metabolic rate. Seated is like 1.5. A general brisk walk, or not even a brisk walk, a slow walk at 2 miles per hour, I believe it brings your metabolic equivalence to 3. So it's 3 times your basal metabolic rate. So say that you burn at rest, the average person burns between 70 and 75 calories at rest. If you were to walk for that hour rather than to just sit, just in your chair doing regular work, you will now go to, say, that would be 225 calories. So you didn't increase your basal metabolic rate by 3 times. You have to consider that during that time, you still would have burned 75 calories. So in actuality, you netted 150 calories burned in that period. And that's another thing. A lot of these watches, they do total sum. They do absolute energy costs of exercise, but they're not telling you, hey, if you had been walking during that bout, like say you were at the shopping mart and you did a full hour of shopping, you were at ShopRite or whatever, Costco, and you were moving and grooving, you would have burned 225 calories. But now we see in the in the weight training literature that you burn 300 or 400. They're not telling you really only burned 180. And there's actually a study by Little that came out, I believe in 2019. They showed that the average 60-minute resistance training session burned 181 calories in that hour. And so that was the net cost of exercise. So that is the net cost, meaning that is what you burned independent of what you would have burned had you just been doing another activity. And so it's commonly overestimated, but I will tell you, I actually just had an interesting conversation. I have a friend that he competed very highly in the NPC. He placed, I want to say, at least 3 to 4 times at a minimum, top 5 at nationals. He was a men's physique and a classic physique bodybuilder. And we were speaking the other day, and he had come to me about some nutrition advice. And he actually gave me his statistics. He tracks this stuff, but he gave me, and now mind you, this is a veteran competitor. This guy has done 20 plus shows, has been bodybuilding for 15 plus years. He was very successful, and he actually walked away to take a career in law enforcement. However, we were having a conversation, and he was telling me about how much he burns in his Apple Watch and like some of his compensatory behaviors, because he was saying, listen, I'm not getting lean like I used to. I don't really understand. I'm still on my feet and stuff. But it was that he was compensating over almost every night by eating back his calories, not realizing the calorie inaccuracy. And he was telling me, he's like, listen, dude, I burn a lot of calories per day. And he's a big guy, don't get me wrong, but he really believed in his mind. And this is someone with tons of experience. He believed that he was averaging 800 to 900 calories in a 75 to 90-minute resistance training session. And I sent him actually the study by Little, and I said, listen, even with 100-kilogram bodybuilders, the most that we see is between 3 to 4 calories per minute of exercise, of intense, resistance training exercise. So say you're doing 90 minutes and you're at that upper echelon, you are that 4 calories per minute. You're burning 360 calories, not 8 to 900, my man. So like, just keep that in mind. And like, let's be a little bit more conscious about some of your post-workout meals, because he was going out to a restaurant every night as his post-workout meal.
Wow.
And he's telling me, listen, my body composition doesn't look the same. Like, it's been a while since, it's been a couple years since he's done a prep. But I said, listen, you can't eat like you used to. Like, he used to do hours of cardio. He used to use a lot of enhancements. There's many things at play that were raising metabolic rate. He was younger at the time. There were so many things. And also, the fact that when he was in a prep, he was getting lean and he wasn't eating at these restaurants with these estimation errors, you know what I mean? And he's getting good meals on the menu. He'll order like a lean steak, he'll order side dishes, but he's still not accounting for the extra butter, the oil, the processing that's going in behind it, or the inaccuracies in the portions. And so these were just things that even the most veteran of individuals, they need to take into consideration, because often it's just things that slip your mind, and these are things that could hold back your progress if you don't have awareness around them.
And I'll tell you something, as you get older, you also get where you can tolerate things that you can eat that were off, quote unquote, that you once could. Like, meaning some of my stuff in my diet, when I diet for my shows, like I can't get away with things I did 10 years ago, certain food groups and things like that. Like, as you age.
You're saying from a digestion.
Yeah, from a digestive standpoint. So that does change. So not every prep's the same, and there's reasons for it. So that's a good point to bring up. The next one, sedentary lifestyle. This one is alarming when you're a coach, to see how many people literally don't walk that much. I would have people be like, hey, just let's see what your step count is naturally. Just for this week, just, live life like you would, like before you hired me. And they'll be like 2,000 steps, 3,000 steps, 1,500. I'm like, what do you do?
So Jeff, imagine I'm probably one of the number one people to talk about steps in our industry, anyone that we know.
Right.
I have done more podcasts on energy flux and the importance of physical activity. So now I attract people that are more aware of it. They've listened to some podcasts, they've listened to our show. However, imagine like 2015, 2016, when I first started, tracking steps with clients, I used to get people that were 1,500, 2,000 steps. And when I would tell them, listen, this is going to be a big anchor. This is a big anchor holding you back. And this is going to be an incredible lever that we could pull and easily improve your body composition, improve your health markers. It was so hard to get through to them, because there wasn't, like I told you, and I said this during my presentation that I did for the PEC, and I've said this on the podcast before, it wasn't until 2018 that the actual term energy flux was put into the scientific literature in the way that I utilize it. So it was just counting steps. In 2015, 2016, that wasn't prominent. And even the the Fitbits at that time, there weren't as many activity trackers. There was no such thing as an Oura ring. So these were things that weren't even thought of. They were an afterthought. No one was talking about NEAT. Non-exercise activity
True.
thermogenesis was something, coined 1999 actually. However, it really didn't get too much play in the literature until the mid 2010s. So these are things, science is usually ahead of a lot of things that we integrate into coaching in some certain aspects, especially within terminology. And so, when I first started, utilizing some of these practices and some of these habits, like people were really, I guess, not opposed to them, but they were a little bit like, hesitant about them, or, they didn't realize it. But even to this day, we see that the average American, averages between 3,000 and 5,000 steps per day. So they are highly sedentary and they don't realize the drawbacks to that. And,
It's true.
it's really funny because many have heard the phrase that you can't out train or out exercise a bad diet. Like everyone's heard that. However, I think
Right.
it's also important to note that you can't undereat inactivity and a sedentary lifestyle. You know what I mean? So the
I
opposite
agree.
applies too. If you are not moving enough, there's, yes, maybe on a daily basis, 1 day basis, a few days, you can undereat your inactivity because you're burning so little and you're going to have to eat so little, but it's going to skew so many other aspects because maintaining high levels of physical activity is not only beneficial for losing fat and overcoming one of the most reasons, or one of the most common reasons for fat loss plateaus, but it's also one of the best predictors for maintaining much of the fat you've lost and achieving a lean, healthy physique long term. And we see that from moderate to very high activity levels, research shows that we're better able to regulate our appetite and alter our body composition in a favorable way without hitting as many stalls due to lowered NEAT levels or dysregulation in our satiety responses. Because at higher levels of activity, our levels of energy intake and energy expenditure are coupled, meaning we're in a well-regulated zone of appetite, while increasing physical activity improves upon our satiety signaling. However, when we're at lower levels of physical activity, we enter what's referred to in literature as a non-regulated zone, where not being active enough actually causes a dysregulation in satiety signals and our fullness response to meals, which can result in having greater difficulty to regulate our calorie intake and lead to eating more calories, which often negates a dieter's deficit because they're not burning a lot of calories through physical activity, but now they're experiencing higher levels of hunger, which drives them to eat more calories. And so
Mhm.
really when we think about this, like I always try to bring it back to like ancestral perspective or evolution. And we're evolutionarily designed to be highly active. So we evolved to move much more on a daily basis than we do
And
now
we
in our
do.
modern day society, where, think about it, like cars have taken over active commuting. Most limit their physical activity, levels due to modern day conveniences. Most people work sedentary jobs, whereas we used to do labor intensive jobs.
Yeah, you don't have to go to the grocery store anymore. You can get someone to do it
No,
for you and
absolutely.
bring it out to your car or deliver it to your house.
Absolutely. So when we aren't highly active, our satiety levels are dysregulated and our
Mhm.
ability to regulate our calorie intakes are hindered, which is further exacerbated by the fact that being in a deficit causes increases in hunger, a higher drive to eat, and a downregulation in NEAT, which is why being sedentary is a major mistake many make during a fat loss phase, which negates their progress.
I agree. And before we go on to our next point about the importance of sleeping during a diet, like neglecting that, I do want to say that when I prepped last year, because I took Brandon's challenge about the steps more personally, I was the least hungry I had been through any prep I had done in my 15 years. And the guys were blown away because I was eating more food because Jason's prepped me,
Mhm.
since 2013, 14, 13, we started working together and just Theobald. And I was like, no, dude, I'm telling you, because normally I have got to get down to like 50 carbs a day. And I was like just miserable having to do cardio, walking and stuff like that.
You were sitting pretty last prep.
Oh, dude, I was like mowing. I didn't have to drop my food until 10 days out. And that was just to make weight. Like we pulled the carbs back 70 grams to just get
But
some
then
extra water.
remember, when you refed, you burned through all those
Yeah,
carbs. You
I
remember
was
that? It
doing,
was
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, it was, I mean, my BGs were even getting lower. And I would be like, so I'm opposite Brandon. I don't have that adrenaline response to my diet. Like, if anything,
Yeah,
I'll
so
get into like the 70s and 60s and I just feel bad. Like when I
you know
get
what's
down that
interesting?
low.
So the reason that I know it's dawn response is I check my postprandial blood sugars, and within 90 minutes to 120, so 2 hours post meal, I'm back down to about 81 milligrams per deciliter. So I'm very insulin sensitive. And actually, when I get my fasting insulin levels done, sometimes I'm out of the range in terms of I'm under two. So I have
Yeah.
very, very low fasting insulin levels. And so I know my insulin sensitivity is good. It's just that morning response, I do get a big adrenaline dump. And it makes sense from, if we look at our circadian rhythms in terms of cortisol awakening response, when adrenaline actually increases in the middle of the night, it's usually right around, it starts increasing around 4 a.m. And that's generally around the time I'm waking up. So it makes sense from that perspective. But we have to realize that physical activity has so many benefits besides the calorie expenditure aspect of it. It's going to help with blood sugar management and regulation. It's going to help lower the area under the curve of both blood glucose, but also insulin. Because if your blood glucose isn't rising as high, your pancreas doesn't need to secrete as much insulin out to facilitate that transport. And then also, we have to look at the fact that the movement of muscles, the skeletal contraction of muscles activates what's called insulin independent mediated glucose 4 translocation. So we're able to uptake and store glucose as stored muscle glycogen without the presence of insulin. So all these things are helping from a metabolic health perspective, but then also they help with the sensitivity of the hypothalamus, the brain center, to our satiety signaling. So just like, if you take a post-meal walk, it's going to help you feel fuller, and it's also going to help with digestion as well. It helps with digestive enzymes. It helps with moving, motility and things of that sort. So there's so many benefits that a lot of people overlook, but I always say, listen, just hear me out. If I have a client that can't do, fasted cardio, hey, no worries. You can't do post-workout cardio, no worries. 10-minute walk at least 3 times a day post-meal. It's a habit stack. So just like James Clear talks about, stack habits. If you already have a habit of, say, I've had people that were extremely inactive, and one of the habits that I've made is that when they go and they brush their teeth, which some of them do, after every meal of the day, go do 10 or 15 push-ups. It's just something, get them active. And so the same thing with meals. Once you eat a meal, you're going to sit down, you're going to eat a meal, you're going to be in a parasympathetic state. Make sure you go take a walk right after. Just head out the door, head out the office. It's really easy to get done.
You want to know something interesting before we move on to the next topic to wrap this one up about walking? When clients come to me on metformin, I always ask them, I'm like, did the doctor tell you to take walks after your meals? And they're like, no. I'm like, that actually outperformed the drug you're on, right? And they're like, and they just sit there and look puzzled. I'm like, yeah, man, 10-minute walk after meal will actually blunt it better than the metformin.
This is the only thing with that study. There are some caveats to it, and I think a lot of people, they quote it because they heard Stan Efferding say it, and I love Stan to death. It's not directly that linked. It's 15 minutes first and foremost. It was done at a higher intensity than just a walk. And it didn't outperform. It outperformed metformin in certain aspects, but in an average group, like we look, and I'll break this study down actually in my presentation for you guys. When I do present the PEC, it isn't like just 10-minute walks were like the end all be all. They beat metformin they were twice as effective. It was a full lifestyle modification, including diet. Then in conjunction with 15-minute walks post meal, 3 15-minute walks outperformed the metformin group. But there's also other studies in the literature on metformin and berberine, actually 1,500 milligrams of berberine compared to 1,000 milligrams of metformin, that show better increases in insulin sensitivity, more significant decreases in, I believe, fasted blood glucose and HbA1c than that walking group. So we have to look across, we can't just take one study in isolation. We have to realize, so that's why, if I have someone on metformin, I'm like, listen, you already have been prescribed this. I'm not going to take you off the medication, but I still want you to do this because it still has beneficial effects. This is a compounding effect. It's never like, let's use one intervention or another. If we could stack these and get even more wins all around, let's make it happen.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love metformin. I actually take 500 milligrams a day for the longevity component. But I've seen research showing that it actually damages your mitochondria. So I've been interested in digging into that. No, but what I'm trying to get at is more, it really is alarming how a doctor doesn't even talk to people anymore about their lifestyle. That, like, hey, just take steps a day, or maybe like really watch what you track to eat. Next time you see me, bring it back. Or, like there's nothing, or even suggesting higher than that. And that's what I'm getting at. Like, you get people and they don't even understand the importance of like being active, because it's just like almost taken for granted. Like being active is like a dirty thing to do anymore for a lot of people.
Like I think that, honestly, I think I'm glad you said that. The average doctor in the US spends between 7 and 15 minutes with a client. So they're really, it's a run of the mill. It's get them in, get them out. And so
it's like some coaching programs out there.
It is. However, I do want to make a point that I think that's where the use and the utility of coaching comes into play, because we are more of a frontline intervention for all of our clients' health and I'm not saying we take the role of a medical practitioner by any means, but what I'm saying is we are the ones that speak to them about their lifestyle. Or I always say that nutrition coaching, it goes beyond the X's and O's of calories and macros and sets and reps in the gym.
True.
I am looking for lifestyle transformations. And that's why we're covering this podcast, because it's not enough to just tell your clients, hey, raise 50 carbs, or, drop, this, or include, 10 more minutes of cardio. We have to look at other factors. It is an all-encompassing approach to physique enhancement that really gets the best results, both from a body composition and from a health perspective. And the next topic is going to be one that my clients are going to be so sick of hearing about. However, this is a mistake that I've seen almost every single dieter make. I admitted to it at the beginning of the podcast, and it is neglecting the importance of sleep, because many are not sleeping enough and not making sleep a priority, especially during a fat loss phase.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not. That's our next mistake. Mistake number 3, neglecting the importance of sleep during a diet. I can say that it's hard, I think, for a lot of people to really understand what goes into making a successful fat loss approach, and even shit, dude, the stuff we were doing, 10, 15 years ago when it came to prep. I mean, how many of us were on the team no sleep, like, yeah, you know what I mean? And then we were like, why do I look worse the next day you wake up, and you just weren't correlating. So it's interesting how important sleep has really become in preps. Like all coaches talk about 10 years ago, it was just up your trend.
I honestly think that sleep is going to be one of the new things that become sexy. It was never sexy to sleep. It was always team no sleep. We had, there used to be, contest prep companies that would make t-shirts or, like those sweatshirts pre-contest, like that would say team nose days off and team no sleep, and the Gary V generation and all that kind of stuff. And it was really sexy. And I was part of that. Don't get me wrong. But I learned from my mistakes, and I've learned to the point that I've dug into the sleep literature. Actually, this is something that I want to do a whole podcast with you on, is sleep architecture and all this kind of stuff. But we are going to cover just sleep and its impact on fat loss, because sleep plays a vital role in every physiological and psychological process in the body. And it's especially important when we're in an energy deficit and pushing ourselves to lose body fat to improve our body composition. And maintaining a solid sleep routine and getting enough sleep is one of the number one lifestyle mistakes I find individuals make when they first come to me. They overlook this. And I really think it's because sleep is often an afterthought. And although many of us realize that it's important, I don't think many realize how crucial it is, especially during a fat loss phase, because of what it does in terms of how it affects and impacts our ability to lose fat, maintain muscle, and manage our appetite. Because when it comes to sleep loss and our body composition outcomes, research on the effects of sleep loss are actually like extremely striking. And I'm going to go over new studies that have just come out within the last 10 years. So this wasn't available to us, Jeff. Like when we first started prepping people, I'll tell you, I started coaching people 10 years ago, but this is all new literature, and it's striking. It is shocking. And I'm always excited when I read this stuff, because it really shows the impact. And now I have tangible information, research to back some of the things I saw in person. But, it's striking in terms of how much poor sleep can negatively impact our fat loss efforts. So in a randomized control trial conducted by the University of Chicago, researchers took overweight individuals and conducted a crossover study where each participant spent 14 days in each of 2 conditions. Now, in one condition, one of the 2-week conditions, they gave them a sufficient period of sleep. And in the other, they gave them insufficient sleep with a washout period in between to make sure that there weren't any residual effects from either condition. And in both conditions, they were in an equivalent energy deficit where all calories were controlled. So they used the same percentage calorie deficit, the same food, the same everything was set up the same in both 2-week conditions. In both conditions, the participants lost the same absolute amount of weight, which was 3 kilograms. So they were losing at a rate of 1.5 kilograms per week. However, in the insufficient sleep condition, participants lost 55% less fat mass and lost 60% more lean mass than when they followed the same diet and maintained the same calorie deficit while getting sufficient sleep. And then this was also accompanied by markers of enhanced neuroendocrine adaptations to the calorie restriction. They saw increased hunger and a shift in relative substrate oxidation towards, essentially what that means is they were oxidizing less fat and oxidizing more carbohydrates because they were in this stress condition in that short sleep condition. And so their fat oxidation was impaired, meaning they couldn't, burn fat as effectively. So those who don't sleep adequately have a harder time dieting and get less results from their efforts. Now, this was a lab controlled study. So every calorie these individuals consume were controlled and accounted for. They were in a metabolic ward. So everything was controlled. There was no ability for them to deviate off the diet. So we have to think about like what would happen if this study was done in the real world. It's logical to expect that those in the sleep restricted condition would have likely struggled with their hunger more, and thus would have probably not been able to actually adhere to that deficit as well, and would have eaten more calories in response to their increases in hunger and also the increases we saw in the hunger hormone ghrelin. So we have to think about this. Yes, in the one condition, when they had insufficient sleep, they still lost the same amount of weight, but they lost a ton less fat and a ton more muscle. However, they still lost the same amount of weight. So if someone was just chasing scale weight, they would say, all right, well, these are equal outcomes. But in the real world, people would have eaten more as a result of those increases in hunger, which they reported both subjectively and then also on their lab work. They saw that it was increasing in terms of their ghrelin hormones. And now in another randomized controlled trial conducted by Sean Youngsted, they put participants on an 8-week fat loss diet. In both groups, their calorie deficit was matched. However, in one group, they slept 1 hour less per night during the week and then made up for some of the sleep loss on the weekends by sleeping as much as they could. So essentially, one group was sleeping one less hour throughout the course of the week and then making up for it on the weekends, whereas the other group got a sufficient, a complete night of full sleep 7 days per week. And now what's interesting about this study is that this is what many of us do. We'll sleep less during the week due to work or other responsibilities or whatever we have going on in life, school, whatever it may be. But then we'll try to sleep more on the weekends to make up for it. Now, when they looked at the results of this study, they found that both groups lost the same amount of weight. So it was the same findings as the last study. They both lost the same amount of weight because they were in the same degree of a deficit. But the quality of the weight that was lost was completely different. The sleep restriction group, who slept 1 hour less per night, lost 84% of their weight from lean mass, so from muscle, with only 16% of their weight loss coming from fat mass. Now, the group that had a full night's sleep every day lost only 17% of their weight from lean mass, with 83% of it coming from fat mass. And these individuals who slept more had greater leptin levels, which impacts our energy expenditure, our thyroid production, and many other factors of fat loss. So despite losing the same amount of weight, the actual body composition changes between the two groups were completely different. One lost predominantly fat, and the other that didn't have enough sleep, only 1 hour less sleep per night. And really, when they looked at the average across the week, because they made up for it on the weekends, those in the sleep restricted group actually only slept less than 3 hours less than the other group, but they still lost most of their weight from muscle mass rather than fat mass. And really, what this comes down to is when you're in an energy deficit, our body needs to oxidize energy and can pull from different tissues to do so. But if you're sleep deprived, you're going to put yourself in a situation where you're more likely to lose muscle and less likely to lose body fat. So you might be seeing your scale weight go down, but it could be it won't be quality weight loss, because sleep loss can promote muscle catabolism via lower rates of muscle protein synthesis. And there's a good amount of data that shows that sleep restriction is associated with the loss of muscle mass in both human and animal models. And actually, a recent study, I believe it was 2020, published in the Journal of Physiology, was conducted on young, healthy men, where they monitored the effects of just a few days of sleep restriction on their rates of myofibrillar protein synthesis. So this is really like a molecular level of muscle protein synthesis. And they found that in just 5 days of poor sleep quality, muscle protein synthesis rates were lowered, which led them to conclude that the data suggests that the lower rates of muscle protein synthesis in the sleep restriction group may contribute to the detrimental effects of sleep loss on muscle mass. Then we also see that sleep loss reduces testosterone levels and can increase cortisol levels, which will further compound the muscle loss, especially in an energy deficit. So this is why sleep is such a crucial component of our lifestyle that we need to pay attention to and dial in, especially during a diet, in order to maximize and ensure that we're putting ourselves in a position to maximize fat loss while maximizing muscle retention, as we should be aiming to improve our body composition, not just lose scale weight. But as you see through all this research, and even if you're someone that has done a dieting phase, and in one phase, you say, for instance, I actually just had this recently happen with a client where I ended his fat loss phase early. He got changed to night shift. And so his circadian rhythm was completely thrown off, and his sleeping patterns were greatly altered. And we just noticed that he was losing scale weight, but his body composition wasn't looking any better. And these are disruptions to sleep quality, sleep quantity. So really, we need to focus on sleep, because this is an overlooked area that could be an easy check mark to helping you regulate your hunger, to increase your energy expenditure, and then also increase the amount of quality weight loss you lose, meaning losing more fat mass and retaining more muscle mass.
100%. I think that sleep, when I talk to people, I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people, like, I can't make up sleep, meaning I sleep 7.5, 8 hours and I'm wide awake and I'm ready to go. Fully recharged. Doesn't matter if I go to bed at 7, I'll wake up at 3 o'clock, 3:30, sometimes latest, like 8.5 is about the longest. But if I also go to bed at 10, I'll still be up by like 5:30, 6 a.m. It's very interesting on that one. Yeah, no, I did my 23andMe test, and when I was talking to Dr. J, I actually suffer. I tend to be more of a light sleeper. So yeah, no, it's always been that way. So I could never ever make sleep up. So I never tried. It was just, if I missed it, I just missed it.
Now, let me ask you, is this, you can't do a sleep extension, meaning sleeping longer than those 8 hours, or
Correct.
are you someone that's able to nap?
I cannot nap either.
Really? Okay, so I'm very much the same way in terms of napping. I think that's more because of how I set up my schedule, and I pretty much overbook myself for everything that I do. So I don't have the opportunity. Remember, one of the biggest aspects of sleep quantity and quality is our sleep duration, in terms of how much time do we give ourselves to put our heads on the pillow. Because that is a big contributor to, because you got to think about it. Most people, one of the biggest mistakes they make is they don't even budget enough time in their schedule for sleep. So they know they should sleep between 7 and 9 hours. However, they get in bed and they only have 7 hours until their alarm's going to go off. So that unless you have 100% sleep efficiency, meaning
which you don't, you lose about 45 to 60 minutes depending upon the individual.
Absolutely. Usually, yeah. There's sleep latency, there's wake ups in between.
Correct.
Middle of the night, there's a changing of, most sleep cycles are 90 minutes in duration. A lot of people wake up in between them. And so you're going to miss some time. If you guys ever look into Aura, or you look into any sleep tracking app, you'll see that you aren't asleep the entire duration. So for instance, I was just speaking about how I have 89% sleep quality, meaning that I'm asleep, on average 89% of the time that I go to bed. So if I was to go hypothetically to bed for 8 hours, I'm going to be sleeping over 7 hours because I'm around 90%. However, if you have a low sleep quality because you have other lifestyle factors, your sleep environment isn't dialed in, it's not dark enough, there's lighting going on, there's noise, maybe blue light exposure, all these different things that downregulate the amount of sleep quality you get, and you're only getting 75%, and you go to sleep for, say, 8 hours, you're only sleeping for 3/4 of those. So you're in bed for actually 8 hours, but you only slept effectively 6 hours. So you didn't get sufficient sleep. You spent a lot of time in there, and that's really where sometimes I'll talk to clients about improving their sleep, and it's not about directly putting themselves in bed for longer. It's about improving their sleep efficiency, meaning that I want to improve their ability to sleep actually, and make up for the most time possible by increasing that sleep efficiency. So more of the time that they're laying in bed, they're actually asleep rather than awake looking up at the ceiling.
Yeah, and as you get older, your sleep efficiency and all that does go down too.
What's interesting about that, they actually show that as we get older, we may actually need less sleep. So there's actually there's these curves that essentially go throughout the life course, where as we're young, we're growing more, we need more sleep. And then during it's almost very similar to metabolism. So I actually just did a post on the how metabolism changes over the life course. It's highest at birth and during our teenage years, and then it goes down a little bit from 20 to 60. It stays about steady, and then when we enter our older age, so after 60 plus, it goes down. Metabolic rate goes down. However, it's very similar in terms of our actual sleep needs. So we see that we actually need the most sleep between when we're children, but then also we have like this steady period from about 20 to 60 or 70 years old where we need a very consistent amount of sleep. And most sleep agencies and research groups will say between 7 and 9 hours of sleep based on how great your sleep quality is in that period. So some people, if they have low sleep quality, they may need more towards 9, or they're more active, or they are hard charging trained individuals that have high stress, they might need more 9. And then people that are more parasympathetic, they have more rest and digest and relaxation throughout the course of the day, they might only need 7. But as we get into our elder years, we actually need less, which is interesting.
It is 100%. Mistake 4, not managing stress well. I can be honest, I don't really have a problem with managing stress well. I have a pretty healthy balance on this, but I'll be curious to see what you got to say on it. Because I don't know. I think that everyone handles stress differently, and I deal with a lot of clients who just have a hard time. They'll be like, I'm not stressed. I'm like, but everything else says you're stressed, from blood glucose numbers to your sleep to your progression in the gym to just how you feel. If you say you feel like hammer dog shit, you're probably a little like something's going on somewhere. So why do you think that people have a hard time managing stress when the majority of people say they're not stressed?
You know, honestly, I think I've spoken so much on stress that a lot of people that come to me, they're aware that they're highly stressed, or maybe it's the clients that I attract. So they're aware that they're stressed. They just don't manage it well. So it's like, it's the same thing as having knowledge, but not having the ability to apply that knowledge. It's useless. So knowing you're stressed, but not doing anything about it is not doing yourself, it's actually doing yourself a disservice. And if we really think about it, the process of dieting can be perceived as both a mental and physical stressor on the mind and body, because the sheer act of going into an energy deficit and inducing the necessary restriction from an energy intake perspective is something that can cause some people a great amount of psychological stress. As if you notice, especially with newer clients that aren't as experienced with dieting, many perceive like just the sheer reduction in calories as a restraint on their food freedom and their lifestyle, which puts them in like this scarcity mindset focused on deprivation. So if you ever had a new dieter, they're so like linked into the process of like, I'm in an energy deficit, my training performance is going to go down. Like they're always anticipating like these things, like they're stressed before there needs to be stress. But then if we really think about it, if we add the fact that an energy deficit is a stress, both physiologically and psychologically, onto the fact that we're living in the most chronically stressed society in history, it's no wonder why we have so many people that have elevated stress hormones. And those are often a limiting factor when it comes to their fat loss goals. And I've noticed with certain clients that even when I had their calories dialed in, a deficit has been achieved through both, their calories, calorie intake, using accurate food and calorie tracking, and their calorie expenditure through their training, through their movement, through their physical activity, and making sure that their NEAT levels are up, there's times that they still have stalls in their fat loss progress. And it doesn't mean that they're not losing body fat, but it's not visible, or we don't see scale weight going down week to week like we would expect. And this is often when I start peeling back the layers of the onion, and it's clear that their halt in fat loss, or halt in visible fat loss progress, is more stress related than anything else. And the amount of physiological stress from dieting, combined with the additional chronic influx of work and life stress, can cause a massive increase in cortisol. And so cortisol elevations occur in order to provide us with energy for that fight or flight response that our body looks to combat stressful events with. However, with this increase in cortisol comes a bunch of effects on our physiology, which can impact our metabolism, our hormones, our appetite, and even our energy expenditure. And one of the most important hormones related to fat loss, which is negatively impacted by high levels of stress and cortisol, is our thyroid hormones. So essentially, we know that thyroid is the master regulator of metabolism and influences our rate of metabolism, which will impact both our energy expenditure and our body composition. And when most people think about dieting and how it affects thyroid, they just think about the effect that being in an energy deficit has on thyroid production. Energy availability is closely linked to T3 levels. So when we're in a deficit for a significant period of time, we will see a temporary downregulation in thyroid hormones. And this is something that, Jeff, you and I both covered in our metabolic adaptation masterclass. So this is something that's par for the course with fat loss, as the process of losing body fat requires us to maintain a calorie deficit where we're burning more calories than we're consuming. And even just the state of getting to low levels of body fat lowers our energy availability, because when we're losing fat, we're essentially losing stored energy. So we're losing energy availability throughout the course of just getting leaner. So decreased thyroid production is one of the many natural metabolic adaptations induced from dieting, as reducing thyroid production helps our body both conserve energy and downregulate energy expenditure. However, since being in an energy deficit is a temporary situation, which is used for the phase specific goal of fat loss, this is a transient and temporary decrease in thyroid, which is just an adaptive response to being in a state of lowered energy availability. So just because we see thyroid go down during a deficit doesn't mean that we now created lifelong thyroid issues, whereas thyroid issues can come from being in a chronic state of stress, regardless if you're eating enough calories or not, which is something that many overlook. And the effects of metabolic adaptation that it has on our thyroid hormones are further compounded by not managing our stress well. So during times of high stress or even just elevated cortisol, we see several hormonal effects, specifically with our thyroid hormone, which impact both our metabolism and our energy expenditure. And we see that Stress can cause a decreased conversion of T4 to metabolically active T3,
Correct.
which decreases our metabolic rate and the amount of calories we burn per day, as T3 is the active form of thyroid, which binds and exerts its action on our cells. With stress, we also see an increase in reverse T3 production, which competes at the binding sites of cells, which essentially what it does is it blocks T3's action. So T3 cannot exert its actions on that cell metabolically any longer. So it's essentially rendering like that metabolically active T3 that we have useless. And then we also see research that shows that high levels of stress can increase thyroid binding globulin, specifically TBG. So that thyroid binding globulin, which essentially what that does is it causes more of our T3 to be bound and less of it free and able to exert its action on cells. So when we have high levels of unmanaged stress during a diet, it can cause further stalls in fat loss, as thyroid is so heavily involved in the fat loss process, seeing as it's basically like the master control of our basal metabolic rate. And it plays so many roles within the fat loss process that when it's down regulated, this is both affecting our fat loss, but also like in that post dieting phase, if you're still chronically stressed, even if you increase energy availability, if you still haven't dealt with your lifestyle stress, with the circumstances and the situations that are causing you to experience chronic stress, you could have all the calories in the world and still see down regulated thyroid production.
100%. Is there anything else you want to tag on that? I think you summarized that really well. I don't think people understand what stress does to their thyroid, and I really appreciate you talking about thyroid hormone binding globulin, and stuff like that. You also have stress that, when you have a lot of stress, you burn through your micronutrients, like magnesium and things like that, which are a huge thing you got to have, because those are the foundation to your house. Without them, those builders, you're not doing shit.
Yeah, but even if we think about it, all right, so we're in an energy deficit. And a lot of people, this is another thing that comes down to tracking. We spoke about chronometer last week. I have a ton of people that come to me and they are not, I often say this statement on podcasts. A lot of people are overfed but undernourished. And I'm
That's
always looking
well stated by a lot of science literature and books I've read.
Absolutely. So it's not only that, but when we enter an energy deficit, we put ourselves in a disadvantageous position, especially if you're not looking at food quality and
Right.
micronutrient intake. And because we have less calories coming in, we have less of an ability or less of a likelihood, if we're not very strategic in our food choices and our food selection, to get the micronutrients needed. So even if we let's focus on thyroid hormone. There are several key micronutrients that are, most are deficient in, especially during a fat loss phase, that are needed for both proper thyroid production and conversion. So one would be like the first one that I always see, selenium. We know that, selenium is an important cofactor that's involved in thyroid conversion. And this is something that many people do not get in the course of their diets, especially when they're in a calorie restricted state. So if you don't have enough selenium, say you don't have enough iodine, there's a lot of people, even within fitness, they salt their meals, but they're not utilizing iodized salt.
Correct.
They have no form of, anything with iodine in their diet to get iodized. So this is something that I utilize with all clients. I'll have them take at least one serving, so approximately 150 micrograms of iodine a day. Another thing that we see is zinc. A lot of people are deficient in zinc, and that's another essential micronutrient that not only helps with testosterone production and so many other hormones, but if we're specifically looking at thyroid, that's one of the main micronutrients or cofactors that's involved in helping with the conversion of T4 to T3. And what a lot of people don't realize is T4 is essentially, I've looked at different, counts of the literature, but on average, when our thyroid gland produces both T4 and T3, we see between 90 to 96% of the hormone that the thyroid gland produces is in T4, which is the inactive form of thyroid, whereas only between 6 and 10% is of T3. But like I said previously, T3 is that metabolically active component, specifically free T3. So we need that to bind to cells, to lock into the receptor and exert its actions so that we actually get the benefits to our metabolic rate and to the many other processes that it's involved in. However, if you don't have these important cofactors and micronutrients, you're never going to be able to take that inactive form of thyroid and convert it into active form of thyroid, which is that T3. So there's so many people that they're downregulated in thyroid production for a multitude of reasons, from high stress, from poor, food choices, from micronutrient deficiencies that they're overlooking. And this is further compounded in a dieting phase because you're in an energy deficit. So now our carbohydrates are lowered. We know carbohydrates are not essential, but they're very highly regulated in the process of signaling to the hypothalamus to help with the thyroid production process. Then we see that, if you're not having good food choices, you might be deficient in several key micronutrients and cofactors involved in the conversion process of T4 to that metabolically active T3. And then you have, stress that you're not managing well. So regardless, even if you had those other two things dialed, it could be essentially blocking and hindering your body's ability to actually utilize and convert that T4 to T3 and actually utilize it. And even if it is converting to T3 and it's converting an even higher or disproportionate amount to reverse T3, it's essentially acting as, a receptor site antagonist, which is blocking the actions of T3. So in either case, there's so many aspects of fat loss that a lot of people overlook. And obviously we've covered so many of the nutritional nuances on this podcast, but that's really what I wanted to talk about, lifestyle, because a lot of people, it's this, this was very heavily focused on fat loss, but these are things that could hinder someone: lack of sleep, lack of stress management. These
Correct.
are components that could hinder you in your reverse dieting phase, in your post-diet phase, in your building phase. These are all things that can contribute to you gaining more adipose tissue and gaining less muscle tissue, or hindering recovery, or decreasing performance, or not seeing, the type of training increases and improvements that you're desiring or that you're working towards, because there are so many lifestyle factors that you have not reined in and really gotten a good handle on.
Agreed, 100%. Well, B-Man, I think we smoked him out on a good 65 minutes or so. We got 4 mistakes, ladies and gentlemen, on the top lifestyles, mistakes that are holding you back from your fat loss progress. If you guys got any questions, any topics you'd like for us to cover, maybe we'll do a Q&A in the week. If you guys have any audience ones or anything like that you guys would like, we can do that for a future episode. If there's any guests you would like us to chat with, feel free to let us know as well. B-Man, where can everybody find you at?
Guys, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at @BrandonDeCruz_ or on my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com.
I'm Jeff at relentlessforever.com for my email, Jeff Unbreakable Black for IG. Be sure to log on and check out my sweet stash. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, be sure to keep sharing us, giving us reviews. B and I really appreciate that, man. He does a lot of work putting together a lot of these studies and kind of framing out everything. And, just show him the love for all the work he does. We greatly appreciate it from me as his good friend and all. But B-Man, you have yourself a good day. Kick some ass, and I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good.
Bye.